From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. We are just days away from the big election on Tuesday, November 5th. While Alabama is not a swing state, the presidential race and the races to determine the balance of power in Congress will have major implications here. We're going to be talking more about the election later in the show. John Rogers, a pollster based in Washington, will join us to discuss what he's seeing from the latest polling numbers. Mental Health Commissioner Kim Boswell will share her advice for those who might have anxiety or trauma from this intense election. And Yellowwood founder Jimmy Rane, one of Alabama's most influential businessmen, will offer his thoughts on how leaders can best serve their country and state if elected to office. But first, let's look at what's on the ballot in Alabama come Tuesday. This is an off year for our executive and legislative offices, so the ballot will be a little shorter. Of course, at the top of the ticket is the presidential race. Former President Donald Trump is the Republican, and Vice President Kamala Harris is the Democrat. The world will certainly be watching that close election on Tuesday night. Alabama voters will also choose a new Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. Current Chief Justice Tom Parker is retiring, and now Republican Sarah Stewart will face Democrat Greg Griffin. The Chief Justice not only presides over the High Court, but is also responsible for administering much of the state's judicial system. All of Alabama's seats in the House of Representatives are also on the ballot, but the one everybody is watching is the close race for the 2nd Congressional District, where Democrat Shamari Figures faces Republican Caroline Dobson. We've reported a lot on this race, and both candidates have been here on Capitol Journal multiple times to answer questions about their campaigns for Congress. If you're a 2nd District voter, or even if you're not, I encourage you to go back and watch those interviews, which are on our Capitol Journal YouTube channel. There's also a state school board seat on the ballot. Democrat Tanya Chestnut, who is the incumbent, faces Republican David Perry for Alabama Board of Education District 5. That district encompasses much of the Black Belt and some of the Birmingham area. Of course, your ballot could contain local offices or referenda. You can find a sample ballot from your home county on the Secretary of State's website at alabamavotes.gov. You can also double-check your polling location right there on the website. In other news this week, Governor Kay Ivey spoke to the Montgomery Kiwanis Club about the state's progress on economic development, education, and workforce participation. But of course, when taking questions from reporters after, the conversation turned to Ivey's recent firing of State Veterans Affairs Commissioner Kent Davis. Davis has said he's considering a lawsuit over his removal, but Ivey defended her decision, saying Davis's behavior produced ample cause to remove him.
Well, I spelled out in great detail to the board in writing, I think it was 7 or 8 different charges, and they couldn't do what I had to do, so he needed to go. Jeffrey Newton is the interim director, and he's got past experience in administering programs and managing agencies, so I look forward to getting the boat sized up so we can continue sailing. Our veterans need our best care.
The governor this week also celebrated the induction of 3 new members into the Alabama Academy of Honor. The inductees include sports icon Charles Barkley, former Alabama Supreme Court Justice Champ Lyons, and business leader Jimmy Rane. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders has more.
Inside the historic chambers of the Alabama State Capitol, Governor Kay Ivey welcomed 3 Alabama icons to the state's Academy of Honor.
It is a fitting venue to once again make history today by inducting a new group of worthy members. Each has left a positive impact upon Alabama.
Inductee Charles Barkley, known nationally for his success in the NBA and as a broadcaster, could not attend, but was represented by Montel Morton, who spoke on Barkley's love for his home state.
As you know, Charles Barkley lives and eats Alabama. He's the voice of Subway, Capital One, TNT, but most important, he's the voice of Alabama. He wears it, he talks about it, he gives back.
Also honored was Champ Lyons Jr., former Alabama Supreme Court Justice. Lyons reflected on his time in the chamber and the doors that opened throughout his career.
I look back on a series of events, doors opening, doors closing, leaving me in places where things would happen that wouldn't have happened but for people that I would run into, some with by arrangement, some otherwise, who would have a long-term effect on whatever I have done.
Jimmy Rane, CEO of Great Southern Wood, shared his humbling journey from starting a small, struggling company in 1970 to leading one of Alabama's biggest success stories.
I think about what Mark Twain said one time. He said, you know, to be successful in this life, it just takes ignorance and confidence. And I'm grateful that I pursued it, both of those, long enough to be recognized here today.
Former U.S. Senator Richard Shelby, in his keynote speech, commended the growth Alabama has seen over the years, thanking Governor Ivey for her leadership in opening the state to business.
Everybody here cares about this state, cares about the people, cares about the future of the state. We've had our challenges, we've had our differences, we've had a lot of things. And we've got challenges today, but Alabama is on fire in a lot of ways. Governor, you're responsible for a lot of that.
The Alabama Academy of Honor was founded in 1965 and recognizes the state's most distinguished citizens. Reporting for Capital Journal, I'm Jeff Sanders.
At a meeting this week of the Reentry Alabama Commission, the state's Bureau of Pardons and Paroles called on state lawmakers to fund an expansion of its highly effective inmate rehabilitation program. Based at the Prep Center in Perry County, the program has helped nearly 300 graduates stay out of prison by offering substance abuse treatment and job training. Director Cam Ward, who chairs the Reentry Alabama Commission, emphasized the program's success and explained how additional legislative support could increase parole opportunities for more inmates.
You know, this month we were at 26% grant rate, and I'm pleased with the direction I think we're headed. Now, I will say the way that you increase your grant rate on parole is to make sure that you have a successful reentry program to send these people to, and that falls on me and me alone. And I think that the more we can improve reentry opportunities, it gives confidence to the judges who put someone on probation. It gives confidence to the parole board that they have programming they can send you to that's going to make sure they don't go back to jail or go back to prison. And I think that's our goal here today. So I think we're on the right track talking about this, and I think it's a good debate and a good conversation to have.
Starting next year, Alabama families will have multiple school choice options, including 2 programs that allow parents to send their children to private schools paid partially with taxpayer dollars. We've reported a lot recently on the CHOOSE Act that goes into effect next year. But this week, APT senior education reporter Trish Crane reports on the state's original school choice program, known as the Alabama Accountability Act, that passed back in 2013. That program allows tax credit-funded scholarships for students to attend a different school. The program had seen as many as 5,700 students participate when it was first introduced, but those numbers have flattened out over the 10-year history. As of last year, there were 2,829 students utilizing Accountability Act scholarships. And this chart from Trish shows how those state-funded scholarships compare to the average per-student funding levels at public schools. As you can see from the beginning, Alabama Accountability Act scholarships paid out by the state are considerably less than the average per-student funding at public schools. In the last year that data was available for both, those scholarships averaged $5,860, while per-student public school funding averaged $8,162. And joining me next to talk about that and other education issues is APT's senior education reporter, Trish Crane. Trish, thanks for your reporting on these education issues. Start with the Accountability Act.
Okay.
Remind our viewers kind of where this came from and how it's different than other school choice programs.
Okay, so the Alabama Accountability Act, it was passed in 2013, and it's gone through a few iterations. You know, they've tweaked it here and there. It started as a way for kids to get out of failing schools, right? What it is, it provides a tax credit scholarship. That's the name of that kind of program, tax credit scholarship program. So donors give money to scholarship granting organizations, nonprofits. The donors get an income tax credit for that. It's a little different if you're, depending upon what your status is. And then the scholarship granting organizations, or SGOs, we love acronyms, they in turn grant the money as scholarships to kids whose families do not make beyond a certain level of income.
Okay. And based on your reporting, what are we seeing? Is it working in terms of, the point, like you said, is allowing kids to escape difficult situations, right? That was the intent. Is that coming to pass?
Well, the who is using the program, who are getting the scholarships, really hasn't changed that much since the program first began. We first started getting good reports in 2015. That was one of the changes that they made. So I've been, compiling these statistics from a couple of places, and we saw the program was really strong in the beginning. Like, it had a cap of $25 million for a couple of years, and $25 million, that cap is the income tax credits that would be granted. So, you think in terms of, okay, they're going to get about $25 million in donations. And then it stood at $30 million for a number of years. But if you think about the average scholarship amount, you kind of cap out around 4,000 kids. Right? Okay. So no more than about 4,000 kids could use the program in any one year. And then we hit COVID, downtime, donation-wise. A lot of kids returned to public school that had been in these private schools. I should be clear, these scholarships are typically used to attend private schools, right, to pay for tuition. Although some kids do go to public schools, like the specialty schools, School of Fine Arts, or one of the virtual schools, which are public schools. So it has, after those down years, it does seem to have recovered. It looks like donations will hit the cap this year, and I think it's 40 million this year.
Yeah, the legislature put it at 40.
Yeah, and then so that's going to increase the number of kids that could have used it. It's also expanded eligibility to children with unique needs, right? Okay. So it does look like things are back on track, is kind of how I put it.
Well, I appreciate that, because with all the talk about school choice over the last year or so, having to do with the CHOOSE Act, it's good to remind folks about the other things, and you've done some really good reporting on this.
Thanks.
I want to ask you about a super local issue, but it kind of applies statewide. You reported on the Autauga County property tax increase that's on the ballot this year. This is a millage increase that would go to better fund public schools. That's how it's being sold.
Correct.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just Autauga County, but a lot of communities have gone through this similar, trying to raise property tax to fund schools lately. What did your reporting show on kind of the trends there?
Well, it depends on if you're a public school supporter or not, how you feel about it, but I will say that the property tax increases and even the renewals have not been popular with voters in recent years, and really recent years, like starting in 2022. Before that, schools could pretty much count on a property tax renewal. Most taxes that have been being passed had to be renewed every 20 or 25 years. So it's a long time from the initial vote to when they come up for renewal. We have seen renewals not get passed, and that is serious business, because that's money that the school system had been able to count on. Local property tax, of course, is the most flexible bucket of money, and that's where you could do something fun with athletics or fine arts, or hire teachers to make your class sizes smaller. And so that has been disturbing. I mean, even in places where you would think they would throw everything at their schools. They have not been able to get new taxes passed. So Autauga County, you'll remember a couple of years ago, proposed a new tax and it failed.
Yeah.
I will say it appears that the Autauga County tax vote does not have a lot of organized opposition. And in most of the places, well, I'd say in all of the places that have not been able to pass a new tax, there's been organized opposition.
I see. Yeah. I mean, look, nobody likes to pay taxes, or especially higher taxes. At the same time, you get what you pay for. So,
right.
Real quick, while I have you, we've got this election coming up. We've reported a lot on the 2nd Congressional District. I've had both candidates in studio multiple times, talked about a lot of issues. We hadn't talked about education, but you did some reporting on this. You asked both candidates their views on education if elected to Congress. What did you find out?
So I'll give my credit to my fellow reporter, Alex.
That's right.
Yeah, he helped out with those interviews. And what we found was that, both candidates recognize the importance of education, and they both, categorize it as a way to develop the workforce. So they have agreement on those things. But as you could expect, Republican candidate Caroline Dobson said, she's supportive. She supports school choice, right? Wants parents in the driver's seat. These are things that we've heard from other Republican candidates. Shamari Figures says it's going to hurt public schools if you take money out of public schools, or it never gets there in the first place because you're using it on something else. It's going to hurt public schools. He makes a point of, most of the kids in America and in Alabama are going to be educated in public schools. So you've got to make sure you have a strong public school system. What that looks like is different for everybody else. The other issue was, what's the federal role in education? Because that, back in the Common Core days, that was a really big deal. And they agree that, curriculum standards, that's a state issue. They both would like more of the money to be used and decided about at the state and local level. But other than that, they're kind of like, I don't think the feds really have a strong role. Although Mr. Figures did mention, one of the biggest things that the feds do right now is protect children's civil rights. They have dominion really over, they can bring suits and they can challenge schools that do not honor kids' civil rights.
Sounds like almost a traditional Republican Democrat worldview on education. Well, Trish, thanks again for all your reporting on this, and it's so great to have you at APT.
Thank you.
More and more, Alabama is connecting what happens in K through 12 education with growing the state's workforce. This week saw the first meeting of the newly created Alabama Workforce Board. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott was on hand and has that story.
Montgomery's Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Plant is an example of progress on the jobs front, according to many state leaders gathering here for a meeting aimed at keeping that success going.
As we begin our work, we must focus primarily on improving the state's workforce participation rate. Currently, there are 50,000 jobs in this state that will still be vacant, even if we had 0% unemployment.
Phil Webb chairs the Alabama Workforce Board, born out of legislation to improve Alabama's labor force.
Its fresh approach to old problems sets this board and your work on the sound footing. And no doubt that it will be a big lift, but we have the right ingredients and the right people in place to achieve great things.
A thriving workforce is big business for Alabama, and the committee meeting today, bringing minds from around the state to talk about how to improve workforce, was on the agenda. As a matter of fact, being held here at Hyundai Motor Company here in Montgomery is an indication of how important workforce is by getting the people to come work and getting the companies to come as well. Attendees say this meeting is very helpful improving the state's workforce by helping people to get ready to compete with other states for new jobs.
We've got to get these people gainfully employed. And if not, we're not going to have the opportunity to have the workers to fill these jobs that other states are going to have. So I think we have a tremendous responsibility to these people that are not in the workforce and to this state to make some policies that are going to implement and change people's lives.
Because our workforce can be defined so differently depending on the kind of job that's out there. So whether you're talking about healthcare, or you're talking about new technologies, or you're talking about manufacturing, whatever it is, we need to think about strategies that encourage our young people to use their God-given talent to the best of their ability and find the way that they can do it in the most affordable and yet effective manner.
In Montgomery, Randy Scott, Capital Journal.
We'll be right back with this week's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is Jimmy Rane, founder and CEO of Great Southern Wood Preserving. Mr. Rane, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd, for having me. I'm glad to be back with you.
I guess, better known as Yellow Fellow, all the titles and everything. Yeah. Well, no, we ran the story today about your induction into the Alabama Academy of Honor. So congratulations on that. Man, that room was filled with just some extraordinarily accomplished Alabamians. So how did it feel to be inducted into that August group?
Well, surprising and quite humbling, to be honest. It was very nostalgic as well as humbling to be in the presence of so many great Alabamians who've accomplished so much for our great state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading through the list of previous inductees, and I've been there for a few of them. Harper Lee, I remember when she was inducted. Hank Aaron, I was there for that. Condi Rice, Tim Cook, Bo Jackson, go down the list. Actually, some good Auburn people in that list. And I guess Charles couldn't make it today, right? Charles Barkley couldn't make it today. But really interesting, and I was thinking, there's some of your comments and about Governor Kay Ivey, who was sitting right there, and y'all known each other a long time. You go way back. I know she, counts on you as a close advisor. So tell me about that relationship. How's that been? Just considering when this is all said and done, after her term ends, she will be Alabama's longest consecutively serving governor, which is really extraordinary. And she's dealt with some extraordinary challenges along the way. So talk about y'all's relationship and how that has evolved since she's been in the top job.
Kay is a model, Todd, for what a public servant should be. It was very nostalgic to be in the old House chamber today with her, because when we were students at Auburn, we were both members of the Auburn Law Society, and she and I both worked in Montgomery and at Auburn, and we were in that House chamber when it was serving as the House chamber, and I was visiting with her when we were making the pictures. I said, bring back a lot of memories, doesn't it, Kay?
How about that?
Yeah, and we were both young in our 20s and just full of excitement and awe about being in the State House, and full of dreams of what, would happen.
Oh, look at you now.
Well, look at her. And it's funny because back then, George McMillan was president of student government. Kay was vice president. And we were all very active politically on campus and doing things. And we had a bet between the three of us as to which one of us three would become governor.
Okay.
Kay won. But in all honesty, Kay hasn't changed a bit from the little girl, young lady that I knew at Auburn. Such a principled human being. She is going to put her duty and her honor and her service
for the people above everything, above party, above friendships. She is going to make a decision every single time in her mind, what is best for my state? And I think that is something everybody could learn from. If you strive to be in public office, that's the mantra you should adhere to.
Well, I kind of wanted to go deeper into that because here we are, the election a few days away. It's been a crazy political season. And we've got an important race here in Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. I don't guess you're any longer in the 2nd Congressional District.
No, I'm in the 1st now.
All right. But a big race for the state. We got 2 pretty impressive candidates. I've interviewed them many times now and gotten to know them. One of them's going to win, though. And I've heard you talk over the years about the importance of being the right kind of leader. Like you were just saying, state-focused, focused on the duty at hand. I remember some of those dinners, I guess they were Auburn dinners, where you came up to Washington and spoke with a lot of congressional staff about your memories from the Hill and motivating them. So I'm curious, one of these candidates is going to win. What would your advice be to them as they go to serve in Congress, to how to be a good member of Congress and how to be effective?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say, stand for a moment and think about what's just happened. You've had the people of this district, of District 2, to decide that they want you to represent them. And your responsibility is to represent all of the people in the 2nd Congressional District, those that didn't vote for you and those that did. And then make every decision you have to make based on what is best for my district and my state, and put everything else aside, because you should not go there with a loyalty to anything other than the people. That's who elected you. And we're blessed in Alabama in that we don't have a lot of the divisiveness that we see going on around the country.
Sure.
We need to celebrate that. And we need to hold on to that very tightly.
I totally agree. And one of my things that I talk about on and off air is especially with folks in this building, is don't let what happened in Washington happen in Montgomery, happen in Alabama, because I saw the deterioration up there of the polarization just going to their extremes on both sides, and how that destroyed the institution of especially the House, but really all of Congress. And I don't want that to happen. And you're right, I think we are fortunate here that it hasn't. But 2026 is coming. You're probably going to have a lot of candidates coming to you to ask for advice and cash and things like that. So maybe some similar advice to those wishing to become governor or next attorney general. Some similar advice for them.
Well, you're correct, and I would not support anybody that is divisive. Jesus said it first in Matthew, and then Abraham Lincoln picked up on it when he made a house divided speech. But Jesus said that a house divided against itself cannot stand. We need to be focused on the things that unite us, the things that are going to make our country great and good and prosperous and bring prosperity and peace to everybody. And that is the duty of our public servants. It is not to any party or any ideology. It's to what's best for our country and for our state, and how are we going to help all our people. That's what I expect from my public servants.
Well said. And, it's just too easy to go down the path of enraging people, getting them all fired up, because that's how you win elections these days. So hopefully we can eventually get back to a more normal politics.
I hear you. But you know what? I have more faith in the people than that. I really do. I think people are hungry for someone to inspire them, not enrage them. The most inspiring words I heard in my lifetime were John Kennedy's inauguration when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." See, I believe most Americans believe that. We want to serve our country and our state. We want it to be better. We want to be proud of it. We don't want to be angry and mad at somebody and vote against something. We want to be for something. Now, that's what I choose to believe. Maybe I'm the one that's naive, but I don't think so.
No, it's well said, and not enough leaders talk like that anymore. And so, no, your comments are very welcome. Obviously, a lot of the lawmakers, a lot of officials themselves watch this show, and I think that's well said and well received. I'm just curious, though. I mean, all this, your career, you've obviously been involved in politics. Did you ever seriously think about running yourself over the years?
Well, let me quote Lyndon Johnson. If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve.
Okay.
I'm 78, and my time has long since passed to serve in public office, but I'm going to support those that I think will go in and try to do the job that needs to be done. I tell everybody all the time, one of the greatest things I thought Winston Churchill ever said was, "The price of greatness is responsibility." So as a public servant, you have responsibilities, and they are to all the people. And you must never forget that.
Well, I certainly won't. Look, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on. And again, congratulations on a real special honor and a special day.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you, Todd. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is Kim Boswell, Commissioner of the Alabama Department of Mental Health. Commissioner, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know y'all have been busy, and there was this tour that y'all gave lawmakers about a week ago up in Tuscaloosa at the Taylor Hardin Secure Mental Health Facility. A lot of work has gone into renovating this, expanding this facility. It's a big priority, not just of your department, but of the legislature. Talk about how it went and how was the reception?
Yeah, it was a great day. Had great weather. We had lots of participation by members of the legislature, a lot of the leadership, as well as the Tuscaloosa delegation. And so we added 96-bed addition to Taylor Hardin. We're currently in a settlement agreement around Taylor Hardin. We entered into a settlement agreement several years ago because there are actually people waiting in jails to be evaluated at Taylor Hardin. And so adding that addition is going to help us make significant progress in getting out of that settlement agreement. And that's really important as we move forward. So we were really excited about it. The tour went really great. We had a couple of the folks who were there interact with the members of the legislature, and I think it really changed their perception of who actually is in that facility. A lot of people think of it as a jail or a prison, and it's really not. The people who are there have not been convicted of any crime. They have committed a crime, and we're in the process of trying to determine if they're competent to stand trial or if they're not guilty by reason of insanity. So they arrived there not being convicted of a crime. Some of them will be restored to competency and move their way through the legal system eventually. But the two gentlemen that they had the opportunity to talk to, I think are really good examples that, you know, people can make a mistake in the middle of a mental health crisis and really go on to be really successful later in life. One of the gentlemen that they talked to, his IQ is out the roof. He's a poet, he's an artist, he's fascinating. The last time I talked to him, he looked at me and said, well, Commissioner, how are you going to change the mental health system in Alabama? And so
sounds like something I would ask you.
Right. So we really wanted the members of the legislature to understand that these are folks who, yes, they might have made a mistake in the midst of their mental health crisis, but they can go on to be really successful and contribute to society. The gentleman that I mentioned, we've trained to be a forensic peer support specialist. And so actually he's in the unit that is the DREAM unit, which is the unit you go to as you're getting ready to leave. And so he's helping other people in the facility that are just coming in, that are really struggling, you know, at that point, that need someone to talk to, someone to provide some support to them. So we have a lot of folks there that are really successful and eventually go on to live in the community and do really well.
Just looking at the images from the facility, it doesn't look like what you conjure up as maybe from the olden days of mental health, jail, basically. It looks like a very modern facility. I guess that's by design.
It is. You know, one of the issues with the old facility is it does look very much like a prison. If you toured the old part of the building, you would think that you were in a prison. And so the design of the new building is completely different, and that's one of the things that the two gentlemen talked about, the difference that it made in just their mental thought process and being in a facility that's light and airy, a facility that is designed to have different programming in different areas. It's really designed to support more group therapy and more active treatment. And so they spoke about that a lot, about just the difference they saw having been in the old part of the building and now moving into the new part of the building, and really spoke to that quite extensively with the members of the legislature, and that was by design. One of the significant things is every room has its own bathroom, which is very different from the old building. And we are eventually, now that we've finished the 96-bed addition, we are going to be renovating the old space. So right now, we're moving the folks from the old space to the new space so that we can renovate the old space and at least try to make it a little more treatment-oriented than it is currently.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of investments from the legislature, I wanted to ask you about crisis centers. This has been one of the focal points over the last several years, expanding the number of crisis centers around the state. So I wanted to ask you, where are we on that? How many and where?
So right now we have 5 crisis centers in the state. We have Huntsville, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, Montgomery, and Mobile. And then in January, we'll be opening a new crisis center in Dothan, Alabama.
Okay.
So we're really excited about that. The Dothan Crisis Center with Spectre Care, they have already opened the 988 call center affiliated with that crisis center. So to some degree, they're already providing a lot of the services, but the crisis center itself will open in January of this year.
Okay. Well, I know that a lot of people are excited to see those numbers grow, considering how long it's taken to get back, from all those cuts.
Right.
While I've got you, I have to ask you, we have just reported extensively on this whole saga dealing with the Veterans Affairs and as it relates to mental health, right? Because you were named in this messy dispute between mental health, the Veterans Affairs Department, finance. Again, messy, maybe should have never been public, but we're here. And maybe it's over, maybe it's not. But how can we move forward? How can the state given all that came out, given all that was, all that came in the public light, how can the state be confident that we are moving in the right direction with getting veterans the mental health treatment that they need?
Right. The dust up, I believe, as you.
We had many terms: messy, dust up, dispute. Yeah, lots of terms.
Yeah. So I'm shaking the dust off my feet and moving forward. So what we're really excited about is the Veterans Mental Health Steering Committee and the work that's being done through that. Through all of this, we've just really tried to stay focused on our mission and on the task that we were given by the legislature to run the Veterans Mental Health Steering Committee. It's been really exciting to see the work that's going on with that group. The group has really come together. We have some really great folks on that committee. Retired General Paulette Risher, who is the vice chair, has been a tremendous help in working with the veterans community. There's a tremendous amount of work going on there. One of the things that you'll see this year in the legislative session is a piece of legislation around lethal means safety. And so Jason Smith, who works for the Alabama National Guard, has worked tirelessly to get this legislation ready for this next session. It's legislation that basically will take away the liability for gun store owners so that veterans who want to store their guns can do that at a gun store. And the legislation is really around protecting the gun store owners so that there's not any liability there. It was originally called the Safer Together legislation, and so now it is the Hunter Houston legislation. It's named after two young men who committed suicide who were veterans. And so we're really excited about that. We're hearing a lot of other conversations around legislation related to gun safety. We even had a conversation with the Pediatricians Association about some potential legislation related to gun safety. Really kind of things that, I don't think anyone would argue with. Things like trigger locks or chamber locks. We know that if you can put time and space between an individual who is thinking about suicide and the lethal means, that you can save lives. So that is a really, really important part of the discussion that we've been having with the Veterans Mental Health Steering Committee. And at this last meeting, we talked extensively about traumatic brain injury. We know that a substance use disorder along with the traumatic brain injury are the two greatest risk factors for suicide. And so we're really excited. In Alabama, we have a nationally recognized traumatic brain injury program that's operated by the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services. And so April Turner, who's the state head injury coordinator, did a pretty extensive presentation. There is a screening tool that's easy to administer. It takes 10 minutes that will determine whether or not someone has that history of traumatic brain injury. And so we're just trying to move forward and find those things that we really feel like we can make an impact right now. The bigger charge for the committee is to develop a comprehensive plan, but we do believe there's some things that we can do right now, like traumatic brain injury screening, legislation around lethal means. Obviously, crisis care and access to crisis services is an important part of serving veterans in our state. We would love to see 988 blasted out everywhere, that wherever veterans are, whether it's the VFW or other groups. One of the things that we really want to do through this committee is make sure that veterans know the services that are available, particularly the crisis services that are available in our state. There are some gaps in services that by the December meeting we'll begin to talk about those gaps and what that looks like and what we need to do moving forward.
Okay, yeah, certainly something to follow moving forward. It's an election year. Election is a few days away. I think a lot of us are going to be grateful when it's finally done. But, I'm just thinking about it because so many people invest so much emotionally in this election and their candidate. I'm not saying that's a wise decision, but it happens. We see it all over social media how, no matter what happens, no matter who wins, some are going to think of it as a catastrophe and are going to just be so emotionally put out. Traumatized, honestly. So I was curious to get your thoughts on that. What might be your advice for somebody who themselves or maybe a family member who is in that situation, that coming out of this election, they are traumatized and not sure how to really handle the outcome emotionally?
Right. Obviously, if they're in a mental health crisis or they're really struggling, they can call 988 as an option if it's to that point where they feel like, there's some type of intervention that's needed. I also think in this particular environment, no matter which side you're on, a lot of folks, from a spiritual perspective, believe they know how the outcome should be. And I think it's really important for people, if you wind up being disappointed, to have that conversation with members of the clergy and others and process how you're feeling about that. And I think that's some of the issue that we see is, people have their mind made up about, it's got to be this candidate or the other candidate because they truly believe that, that's the right thing. And so for those who really look at it through that lens, I think it's really important to have conversations with your clergy and other members. The other thing I would say is put the phone down. Put the phone down and step away from the television because there is so much information that is coming at people right now that it's just absolutely overwhelming. And we talk about it with kids, but it's also really important for adults, to really step away from that and engage with their family, and if need be, engage with a therapist. If you're really having a hard time and you're confused by the outcome and it didn't turn out the way that you thought it would, then I do think it's a situation where there's some, a therapist or someone to talk to could help you process through that. But staying connected with family and friends and stepping away from really the phone and the social media stuff is really important, because the more you're doing that, the less connected you are to family and friends and the less connected you are to your community. And I just see that in general as not good for your mental health, and particularly in this situation, it's just not healthy.
Yeah. It's really good advice, and I really appreciate you putting it the way that you did. Look, we're out of time. Thanks so much again for making the time to come, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is John Rogers, a pollster out of Washington, D.C. with Signal. John, thanks for coming on the show.
Todd, great to be with you. Exciting that we're just a few days away now from the election.
Right. So I wanted to check in with you because here we are, just days away. It's been a wild election year. I'm not going to ask you who's going to win because nobody knows that. This is a coin flip, right? But what are you seeing in your polling there at Signal? What are the battleground states and what are the trend lines are you seeing?
So there are 7 main battleground states across the country. When you're thinking about the Electoral College, and obviously the winning candidate has got to get to 270 electoral votes, those 7 battleground states are broken out by 3 Rust Belt states in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. You have 2 states that are kind of in the southwest part of the country in Nevada and Arizona. And then, of course, Georgia right next door and North Carolina. And so those are the 7 states that are really going to decide the election. And those are the 7 states where the candidates have spent almost all of their time over the last week or two. You did have Trump at a rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City, and then Harris was doing a rally talking about abortion in Texas fairly recently as well.
Right. And so we hear a lot about undecided voters, right? Because you get to 48 for Trump, 48 for Harris, or whatever. So we talk about undecided voters and their critical role in this election. How many are we actually talking about? How many undecided voters are there in these swing states? And more importantly, what are the issues that they're making their minds up here in the final days?
It's a great question. And the great majority of voters are decided at this point. You have maybe 2, 3, 4% of voters, depending on the state that you're looking at, who say that they're still undecided. Some of those voters are not going to show up, right? They're lower propensity voters, meaning that they've only voted maybe in one presidential election in their lifetime. And so you include them in a survey, but it's really unlikely for some of those undecided voters that they're actually going to go to the polls. For now, some of those other undecided voters who I do think will likely show up at the on election day and cast a ballot, they tend to be younger voters. They tend to be voters who are not college educated, a lot of times younger men. And this is something that the Trump campaign has really tried to appeal to those voters down the stretch. You had Trump going on the Joe Rogan podcast fairly recently. I saw that JD Vance is going to be on that podcast as well. That has a listenership that definitely skews towards men under the age of 50. And so it's a very strategic decision by the Trump campaign to try to appeal to young men down the stretch. Voters over the age of 50, the vast majority of those voters are decided at this point. And so that's who Trump is going after. And then for Harris, what she's trying to do is she's trying to really gin up her base of left-leaning suburban women. And that's why she's been talking about abortion so much over the last week or two. But I really think that may be a strategic miscalculation in some regards, because for those truly undecided voters who will go vote on election day, their concerns are more about inflation and the economy and immigration, which are the 2 top concerns for voters overall.
Well, I'm just thinking back to elections past when it was, soccer moms were the deciding factor, or I think NASCAR dads were the deciding factor. Now we're talking about the bro vote, which who thought that was coming? Well, let me ask you this too. I've always heard that over the years, especially I guess you could say the last 20 or 30 years, that based on the polling, Republicans might have a slight advantage in terms of the electoral college, right? The way the map turns out, and that for a Democrat to win, for the successful Democrats, for Joe Biden or Barack Obama, the successful Democratic presidential candidates, they needed a built-in advantage in the polling, like a 3 or 4 point national lead to make up for Republicans' more electoral college vote. Is that true? And what are you seeing in terms of that national polling?
Yeah, no, that still is true. And you think about the last 2 Republican presidents, obviously George W. Bush did not win the popular vote in 2000. Neither did Trump in 2016, yet both were able to win the Electoral College and therefore win the presidency. And so Republicans have had an advantage in the Electoral College just because of the way that votes are spread across the country. But what is interesting is I think that Trump, because of his appeal more and more to some working class voters in states like New York, not in like New York City, but in kind of areas outside of New York, that is probably meaning that votes are more broadly dispersed for Trump and his coalition than maybe even in 2016 or in 2000 with Bush. But yes, I would say that Harris likely needs to win the popular vote to win the Electoral College. It is very difficult to imagine a scenario where Kamala Harris lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College. But you could imagine the inverse happening again, as in 2016, where Trump might lose the popular vote by a point or 2, but is able to win a majority of those battleground states, is able to win Georgia back, hold on to North Carolina, and then also be able to win to Pennsylvania and then get to 270.
Well, we will be watching those states, but we've got a really important race here in Alabama. Could decide who holds the majority in the House of Representatives. That's Alabama's 2nd congressional district. Democrat Shamari Figures, Republican Caroline Dobson. I'm not sure if there's been any polling specific to this race, at least not publicly. There's been some groups out there. What have you heard? What are you seeing in terms of how this race might be decided?
It's an incredibly competitive race, and I think that was unexpected for the Democrats. This is a district that I think a lot of national Democrats thought that they were going to walk away with, but Caroline Dobson and her team have run a really solid campaign, and national Democrats have had to pour a lot more money into this race than I think that they expected if you went back to the summertime. So there has not really been any high quality public polling that has been out there, but this is a district that Kay Ivey won in 2022 when she ran for governor. And so I think that, it's a tight race from all appearances. And I think that what will really come down to is whether or not Shamari Figures is able to get a really high turnout of rural African-American voters in order to win the district. But I think it's a very competitive district as we come down to the final days.
Yep, the old GOTV. It's going on right now. Well, John, we're out of time, but thanks for taking the time. I know y'all are busy, but thanks for coming on Capitol Journal. We'll be watching on election night.
Todd, great to be with you as always.
We'll be right back.
Moundville Archaeological Park contains the remains of one of the largest prehistoric Native American settlements in the United States. Founded around 1120, Moundville was located on the banks of the Black Warrior River, 14 miles south of present-day Tuscaloosa. A thriving ceremonial and political center of Mississippian culture, the site was occupied for more than 3 centuries, but was abandoned by the early 16th century.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to vote on Tuesday. Again, sample ballots and a polling location finder is on the Secretary of State's website at alabamavotes.gov. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.